Well, good morning and welcome to New Hope. Glad you joined us. A shout out to all of our dots all over literally all around the world, up in Canada and Brazil and South Africa and England and around the States from Texas to Alaska, all over the East Coast. So we're glad you're with us, and I'm glad you're here with us today as we continue in this series on 6 months to Thanksgiving. And let me give you a little picture behind why we're spending a few weeks talking about this, because you're thinking, Mike, the title kind of tells me it's 6 months of Thanksgiving. Why don't we just wait for it till we get there, right? But there's a premise that's behind this, and it's simply this: that life is just better when you start with thanks. That there's this conviction, at least I have, and as a pastoral staff we all have sort of resonated around this simple truth that life is just better when you start with thanks. But I have this sneaky suspicion that for most of us, if we were honest, we would say, I'm probably not as grateful, as thankful as I should be. And that's not to say that you're not thankful or grateful. You have lots of things to be thankful for. I have lots of things to be thankful for. And it's not to say that you're ungrateful, because if I said that, you'd get mad and stomp out of here, especially if I was pointing directly at you, and I'm not going to do that today, all right? But I think all of us have this disconnect, this thing that rattles around inside of us that says, you know what? As much as I have, as good as my life is, I'm probably not as thankful as I ought to be. That I probably don't express it as much as I need to. And I probably don't live it as much as I need to. And so we thought, it's not only 6 months to Thanksgiving, but for some of us, if we're honest, for some of us, it might take us 6 months to get to the place of thankfulness. And that's okay. Because if you can get there, I'm convinced that your life, if I can get there, I'm convinced that my life will be dramatically different. And so we want to start off 6 months away from the actual Thanksgiving day and begin this process that hopefully will engage all of us in this simple truth that life is just better when you start with thanks. And here's an idea we're going to look at today that Jesus actually tells a story about. And that's this: that how and why you are grateful impacts you more than you recognize. How and why you're grateful impacts you more than you recognize. In fact, Jesus will tell a story, a parable, and a parable is simply a made-up story, all right? And sometimes people think, oh, wait, Jesus telling a made-up story, he's telling an untruth. It's a story, all right? Don't get worked up over it, all right? You tell stories all the time, and some of your stories are really made up, right? But he's making up a story. He makes up a story, and parables are simply a story to drive home one simple point. It's not about 5 points. It's not about 6 points. It's not about 3 points. It's simply about one single point. Today we're going to look at a story that Jesus told to a very specific group of people. But before we get there, I invite you to bow your heads, and let's pray one more time together, okay? Father, I don't know about the rest of us in this space today or watching online, but I know for myself that I'm not as thankful as I need to be. And I use those words intentionally, that I need to be. That there are things that happen all the time that I take for granted. There are things I stop and think about, oh, I'm thankful for that, but it just ends there. It doesn't seem to be thankful in the way that thankfulness ought to be. And as much as I recognize that, I'm not sure how to get from there to where I would love to be. When I see in the lives of some people who just live these great, thankful lives. And for some of them, they've gone through some terrible, tragic things, and I'm not praying for terrible, tragic things for me or for anybody else today. But what I am asking for is just a little clearer, a little brighter glimpse of your grace to us. And that somehow that glimpse would change how I act and how I think. And most importantly, how I live and how I treat all of your creation. And if you can help us take another step in this process that we started last week, we will be thankful at least more than we came in today. In your name, amen. So we're going to pick up the parable. It's a very short parable found over Luke chapter 18. If you're not real familiar with the Bible, Luke is one of the guys who was not on the scene. He was not one of Jesus' disciples. He's a guy who comes years later and says, hey, I've heard about Jesus. I want to go put together a story. He was kind of an investigative reporter. He goes out, interviews people, talks to people, listens to things, reads what other people have written or have talked about, and puts this down so that we would understand who Jesus was like. And Luke, in this discovery, oftentimes comes up with stories, some other things that other gospel writers didn't put in for whatever reason. And so today he's going to tell a story that's found only in Luke. And here's what the story's about. The story's about one guy who is not as good as he thinks he is. You know anybody like that? Please don't point at them if you do. But just kind of shake your head yes, all right? Just look at me and shake your head. Any of you know somebody like that who is not as good as they think they are? Right? The story's about one guy who is not as good as he thinks he is and another guy who knows he's not as good as he needs to be. You know anybody like that? And again, don't point at them. Even if it's you, don't point at yourself, all right? But it's kind of a picture of life, isn't it? We have people that are, who are not as good as they think they are. They think you're really good, and you're just like, no, you're not there. And then others of us are kind of like, hey, I'm just not that good. I'm not good at all. And so Jesus tells this story about that. And if you've been around church, a place like this for a lot of years, you've heard this story before, and it's going to be familiar, and you want to run right to the end. But I want you to look at it. In fact, I'm going to tell it to you today in a way that's different probably from the way you've heard it before. Because I think sometimes we've said it in a different way because we projected onto this story people that we know who are not as good as he thinks he is. And what if we look at it from a different perspective? That's what we're going to try today. So here it is, Luke, Jesus. In fact, this is incredible. This is one of those few parables that Jesus tells us, or at least Luke, as he discovers this, Jesus specifically told this to a specific group of people. So Luke says this is who Jesus was talking to. And this is one of the few parables that Jesus actually tells us what this parable means. Because if you've read your Bible, you know Jesus tells lots of stories, right? These meet-up things at one point, and oftentimes he tells the story, he drops the mic, and he just walks away, which leaves everybody going, I have no idea what he was talking about. And there's only one point to these things, and it's like, I don't know what it is. Does he mean this? John, what's he thinking about? What is this whole thing, right? In fact, sometimes Jesus will later get his disciples to the side and say, guys, do you know what I just taught? And they'll go like this. We don't have a clue, Jesus. We have no idea, right? Tell us. Really? But this is one of those rare occasions that we know who Jesus was telling the story to, very specific group, and he will tell us exactly what the parable means. So there's we don't require any brain power today. It's just simply, here's the story, here's what he meant. Oh, okay, so here's how it begins. Jesus, Luke tells us, told this story, this parable, to some people who thought they were very good, that they were very confident of their own righteousness. They thought they were really good people. That's who Jesus was talking to. Not only did they think they were good, they looked down on, that is despised, everyone else. And have you ever had the joy of being around somebody like this? It is just a blessing to be in their presence, isn't it? Who love to tell you how good they are and how bad you are, which just warms your heart, which makes you love God more and more and more. But that's who Jesus is talking to. The people who think, I got my stuff together and nobody else does, and I can tell you all those things, and well, you really should have this together, and you don't. So Jesus begins. Two men go to the temple to pray. And just a little stop story there. The temple in Judaism, in Jewish culture, was the place to go and meet with God. It was this idea that God wanted to be as close as possible to his people, and because sin had come in, and because all these other things had happened, that God couldn't stand in their presence and have them be alive, and so he created this temple. It was a place to come. It was supposed to be this place. In fact, this temple was designed for everybody to be able to have access. Lots of gates, lots of entryways, and the hope that everybody would come. These devout, faithful people, and people who just needed God. This would be the place they would meet. They'd be told the story of God. They'd be told about how sins are forgiven, how there's hope in him. And so, two men go up to the temple to pray. One of them's a Pharisee, and everybody say, yay. Oh, that's a poor yay. Now, you got to think, in the group that Jesus is talking to, when Jesus says Pharisee, they all go, ooh, hey. I mean, this is the good guy in the story. Because that's how these stories go. So we'll try this one more time. One's a Pharisee. I know it's a cloudy day. I'll give you a break, all right? And the other, a tax collector. And everybody went, yeah, boo, hiss, right? Because the tax collector was somebody who had sold out their fellow citizens. Rome had come in and taken over the country. And these people worked for Rome to take money for Rome and to take a little money for themselves. And they were empowered by Rome to do that. They were working for a foreign government and being a traitor to their own government. And so when Jesus says two men go up to the temple to pray, this place where everybody's supposed to meet, there's this Pharisee, these great devout. And these were the devout people. These were the sincere people. These were the committed people. And also comes this tax collector. Publican sometimes in some of your versions, all right? And the Pharisee stood alone, and he prayed. In fact, the actual language is he prayed to himself. And oftentimes, when we've heard this idea, I'm so conceited, I'm praying to myself. But I think the meaning is that he prays this to him, that he's sincere in this. That he stands up to pray, and he's not shouting this out. He's praying to himself, God, man, I thank you. I really thank you that I'm not like other people. And we may go, and oh, that's terrible, and laugh at that. But hasn't there been some times when you've prayed that same prayer? I'm so glad I'm not one of those people. Because we all got those people, right? You see them at street corners. I've been going to Baltimore about once a week because one of our church members is in a hospital up there, and got the squeegee boys, right? You have all these different people around us. You have people you've learned to not like because they're on the other side of the political system or on the other side of a religious system or on the other side of a melatonin issue. They're on the wrong side of a bank account. And this Pharisee, this devout person stands up and says, God, I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that I'm not like other people. I'm not a thief. I'm not a cheater. I'm not an adulterer. Or even like that tax collector. This is a sincere prayer from this guy. That he is thankful that he's none of those things. Because none of those things was a good thing to be. I mean, it's not good to be a thief, right? How many of you ever had something stolen from you? I mean, it's a great feeling, isn't it? It just changes everything. I mean, especially if you've had your home broken into, because now you feel like I can't even be safe inside my walls, which if you begin to think about it, is really a dumb idea anyways. But I don't want to freak you out, all right? Not good to be a cheater. Somebody who takes advantage of other people. Somebody who pulls a fast one on somebody. Not good to be an adulterer, to be unfaithful. And it wasn't good to be a tax collector. A bad guy who sold out his own people. And we actually have some verbiage for that. Different cultures, right? About people who are of your culture who have sold out your people. Then he begins to do a little self-reflection. God, I'm thankful that I fast twice a week, which if you've ever fasted, I'm not sure how you're so thankful for that twice a week. And I give 1/10 of that is pay tithes on everything I get. And if you've struggled with this idea of giving back something, but he says, listen, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that I fast, that I restrict myself for a very good religious purpose. And I'm about self-control and about consistency and about faithfulness. And here's the reality. There's always the temptation to compare and declare, I'm glad I'm not. So before we think of the story and just think the Pharisee's the jerk, because if you know the end, you know that's where we're going to end, by the way. If you don't know, I just blew the whole line for you. Might as well tell you how the Avengers movies goes, right? I'm not going to do that. No. But there is, right? There's always this temptation to go, I'm glad I'm not that. You know, you go back to your first high school reunion, or maybe your 10th high school reunion, and you look around that class and you go, man, I'm so glad. I'm glad I'm not like that anymore, right? Or I'm not them anymore. Sandra Stanley, and she has this compassion trap. It's a great website or comparison trap, where she talks about this whole idea of how dangerous comparison is. I thought there was a great line that envy and selfishness create disorder in our minds and in our actions too. How when we have envy as part of our life, or even selfishness, this kind of self-directed thought, how it does something to our mind, and how it also does something to our actions. It affects how we treat others, how we see others, and how we see ourselves in this whole thing. The tax collector, who's standing at a distance over in the corner, would not even look up to heaven. Here's somebody who recognizes he is a sinner, and he is shameful to be in this place, and he is just not sure what he's doing, and he sees this really good person over there. And I don't know whether he can hear all the words, but if he can, it's a bad scene. If he can't, it's still a bad scene, because he just feels out of place. He's wrong to be here. And all he does is beat his chest and say this: God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And actually, the original language is a little stronger. It actually says, have mercy on me, the sinner. He's not looking at anybody else in this room. He's just looking at himself. And it's one of the most powerful prayers that Jesus slips into this parable. It's a one-word prayer. A lot of you have tried it before. It goes something like this: help. And that's what he says. That's a shorter version of what he says, but he just simply says, help. I know I'm not what I'm supposed to be. I know I'm not at the place I thought I would have been. I know I've done things that I should not have done. I know I'm currently working in a job situation that is not the right job situation. And at this moment, I'm not making promises. I'm not saying, God, if you help me out this time, I'm gonna follow with you. If you just do me the solid now, I'm never gonna do this again. I'm gonna quit that job. He just simply says, help. To which Jesus summarizes the story. Now, that was the story. Two guys go to the temple to pray. One guy stands up and says, man, I'm thankful that I'm not like those people. I'm thankful that I do the right stuff. The other guy goes and simply finds himself over in the corner, and all he can say is, help. And Jesus says, I tell you, when this man went home, he was right with God rather than the other man. That's literal language, which I think leads us why Jesus says the very next thing. Because he says, listen, the one guy, he's all right with God. The other one, not so right with God. Because all who make themselves great, that is, exalt themselves, will be made humble, and all who make themselves humble will be made great, that is, exalted. Jesus wants to make sure that he says, this guy went home justified and the other one didn't, that we know which guy is which guy. And it's an uncomfortable conclusion that Jesus gives. Because there's a great feeling to being exalted. I mean, you'd like to be told you did a good job, don't you? You'd like to be appreciated. You'd like somebody to say thank you for doing that. Or you do this job better than anybody else. If we didn't have you working for us, I don't know what we would do. You're the guy we turn to step in, right? You're the woman who just seems to bring it all together and get it all done, and you're it, and you begin to think, yeah, I am it. And you may be it. And I'm not denigrating your abilities, your wisdom, your personality, any of those things. I think the question Jesus is asking us all to ask is, what do you do? Especially in a religious setting, in a faith setting. When you see people who are way off track, what's your initial response to them? And if you're one of them, what's your response when you discover that you're one of them? What we think determines what we do. For the Pharisee, this devout religious guy, he thought he was very thankful for all the stuff that God had done for him and the stuff he had avoided and the stuff that he could say, look, this has been so much better. This is great. In the process, he began to feel like, man, I'm really in a good spot. And the other guy, all he could say was help. See, how you see you is linked to how God sees you. Which is kind of weird, isn't it? We always talk about how God sees you this way. We need to think about how he sees you. But the reality is, how you see you is linked to how God sees you, because in this story, how God sees them both is much different than how they saw the other one. So, let me try to be helpful. And maybe begin to nudge us all in 6 months to Thanksgiving into that process. We all need to check our thoughts. We all need to consider how we see ourselves, how we see others, how we value what God has done in life. For some of you, if you have incredible stories, I've heard some of your stories. And those are fantastic stories, but it's always hard in those stories not to begin to get a little bit messed up and twisted, because we all got our stuff, right? We all like to slide in a little bit of things. We all like to puff things up a little bit. I'm sure none of you ever do this, but I will admit that sometimes I bump up the situation a little better than it is. I leave out some details that would not maybe necessarily end up the way I'd like them to, but I would put all the other stuff in. Because there's just something that feels good about that, isn't it? And for all of us, we want to feel good, and because we want to feel good, it plays into this, and sometimes we just need to check our thoughts. Lisa Bevry, a Christian author, says, listen, comparison will cause you to feel prideful or depressed, but never fulfilled. And both these guys have compared themselves, right? First guy compares them to all those people, and he says, thank you, Jesus, that I'm not like them. The other guy goes, I'm them, and I got nothing. And both of them end up feeling at that moment unfulfilled. And Jesus says one goes away unfulfilled, even though he thought he was fulfilled. He was really unfulfilled. And the other one, who was felt unfulfilled, goes away fulfilled, which is kind of crazy and weird. Admittedly, for some of you in this room, that's going to be a challenge. Don't point at them. But let's admit it. All of us have a little jerkiness in us, don't we? And it's easy to be a jerk. It's especially easy to be a jerk when you're right. When you're doing things right. When the others are all messed up, right? They just need some information. It's easy to be the jerk. But don't be a jerk. Being a jerk never ends up in a good situation. It begins to tear away at how people look at you and see you. And jerks normally end up in one of two spots. either surrounded by a lot of other jerks, I call that a jerk fest, or they end up just by themselves. And that's a jerk who still thinks he is right. But everybody else apparently is wrong, and that's okay because he's right. If you've been around, you know I love Anne Lamott. She's got some great stuff, very raw stuff, but it's a great story of coming to faith later in life or back to faith. I love how she puts it. She says, listen, gratitude begins in our hearts and then dovetails into our behavior. That something takes place inside of us and then it begins to change in our lives. It means you are willing to stop being such a jerk. When you are aware that of all that has been given to you in your lifetime and the past few days, it is hard not to be humbled and pleased to give back. Which is why I think we need to do the next piece. And that's learn the gift of reflection. You know, sometimes I think one of the best things about Thanksgiving is that it forces us every year to stop and have a little bit of reflection. But even that's uncomfortable for some of us. I mean, especially if you're part of a family tradition that on Thanksgiving they go around the table and you say things you're thankful for. And if you don't get to go first and get all the easy ones out of the way, and you're like fifth or sixth, it's bad, right? Because you got to come up with something and you're scrambling thinking, what do I got? You know, everybody already said for the food, which why don't they be specific so leave some for the rest of us? But the gift of reflection, to stop and to consider and to just think about the things to be thankful for, the many things to be thankful for. And if you have a hard time with that, let me give you just one phrase that has helped me in a lot of situations, and it's simply this. It could always be worse. Thank you, John. I was hoping I'd get an amen out of that. Oh, don't bill on now. It's too late now, all right? But it could always be worse. And I know when you're in bad situations, you think, oh, it couldn't be worse. It could always be worse, right? I mean, you can always begin to dream and to think and to consider, and it could always, always, always be worse. And you say, well, no. If I died, it would be worse. Well, no, that could be worse, right? Maybe you have this great insurance policy, but you didn't sign one little spot on it. And now the company doesn't have to honor it. So your family doesn't have anything. It could be worse, right? I mean, you can just go down the list and list of things, but that's the pessimistic side of me that resonates with that. But I think what God's trying to get me to, and I think I'm hoping for all of us, is this place of thankfulness not based on things could be worse, though that moment can generate some ideas. But to be thankful for all the ways that life is better because of His presence in your life. Maybe you see it in the smile of a grandbaby, right? You know, maybe you see it in a new job opportunity. Maybe you see it because when the light went green today, you fumbled for your phone because even though you weren't supposed to be on it, you were just taking a peek at it. And as you looked up, the car that should have stopped went through. Those are moments to reflect on and be thankful for. I love what Pastor Dave shared with us last week about this idea about thank you notes and about how these researchers have studied that simply the act of writing some thank you notes has this incredible impact on our own emotions. And what if in your reflection you wrote those thank you notes to them? By the way, Mother's Day is next Sunday. Always trying to be helpful as your pastor, all right? But what if you wrote some thank you notes? You reflected and names pop up and situations pop up. What if you said this and said, I want to thank you for, years ago you offered me some great advice and It's really made a difference. I just want to say thank you. Just that simple thing. What if you began to take the things that are in here and begin to put them down? And not only write thank you notes to them, what if you began to write thank you notes to yourself? To which right now you're thinking, Mike is gone crazy. But what if? What if in your reflection you are thankful for something that has changed in your life, some way you're doing things differently? And what if maybe nobody else knows about it, but what if you just wrote a thank you note to yourself to say, Mike, I'm thankful that you started to do this particular thing, whatever it is, and the impact it's made just on how you see life and how you do life. Because for some of us, if we're honest, we need somebody to thank us, and there isn't anybody out there. So write yourself a note. It still counts. In fact, you can mail it to yourself if you really want a surprise, right? And lastly, take your cue from Jesus, which always gets an amen. But it should. Jesus tells these stories not just to teach us some lesson. He tells these stories so that we'll think and look at things differently than we did before, to consider, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about a Pharisee could be that bad, because they can be a little jerky at times. They are very committed and devout, and they really are better than me. And so, how do you complain about that? Or there's somebody who's just so filled with shame that all they can say is, not I'm going to be better, but help. And maybe for your own sake and to your own self, you need to take the cue from Jesus. The one who made you, who loves you, and saved you, it did the same for them too. Because both the Pharisee and the tax collector are loved by Jesus. Which means, even you are loved by Jesus. So as we wrap this up, let me just ask you a question as you think about your life. What would it look like? What would it look like if you chose to stop comparing? Because some of you compare a lot. And we have a whole system that's structured about comparing ourselves, right? But what if you went counterculture? What if you broke away from that whole comparison and just did the old, it's pass or fail? We have a little thing. Some of you may not know that Pastor Jason and Pastor Marilyn have been in this process. They've been doing their master's degree while they work, which means it takes a long, long time. And so this, just a couple of months ago, they both decided, you know what? We're just going to plow through this. We want to get done. So Pastor Marilyn will finish the end of this year, which is great, yeah. And Pastor Jason is going to finish next spring, which is another great thing because he's been at it longer than Marilyn. But here's the thing: we have this kind of running joke within the pastors. Jason and I are on the same page, which is C's get the degrees. Pastor Marilyn is one of these, I got to get an A, I got to get an A, I got to get an A, but I am working on her. Because it's just a lot. I mean, it's a lot. They both, we have plenty of stuff to do around here, and then you throw schoolwork on top of that, and they're both going to be gone and off and on in the summer just trying to plow through this, and I hope you be supportive of all that. But this whole comparison is just built in that system, right? And even we compare ourselves to our own things, our own expectations. But what would happen if you chose to stop comparing, to not look down on them, and you all have a them. We all have them's. And what if you began to look at them differently? And when I say differently, I don't mean with pity. But what if you began to look at them as people who, because of situations or circumstances or backgrounds or even choices, have ended up in a really much different spot than you? But that doesn't make you better than them. It just makes you different from them. What would that look like? And what would it look like if your focus was on just you? Much like the tax collector he doesn't even think about the tax collector, right? It's just about him and the spot he finds himself in. And he's not so worried about comparing, because the truth of comparing is you always find somebody the worse than you and you are happy. In fact, a lot of you have your go-to person, right? That when life is bad, you look at them, or maybe sometimes it's a couple or a family, and it's like, oh, whew, right? I feel so much better, because they are just so messed up. But you also have people in your life that you look at them and you think, how in the world did they do it, right? I mean, they have that Instagram life. That the food is always gorgeous, and they're always going to these incredible places, and their kids always seem to be dressed up. How do they keep their kids dressed so nice all the time? But what would it look like if your focus was just on just you? And if that was enough for you? I hope you begin to think about that. About your own life and your own walk with God and your own experience with God and your own need of God will somehow dovetail into not just your experience with God, but your experience with life and those around you.